This episode is sponsored by Transcend, a veteran-owned and operated performance optimization company that I introduced recently as a sponsor on this show. Well, since then, I have actually been using my products and I've had incredible success. There was initial blood work that was extremely detailed, and based on that, they offered supplementation. So I began taking DHEA, BPC 157 for inflammation, based on the fact that I've been a stuntman, a martial artist, and a firefighter my whole life. Lots of aches and pains. Dihexa to help cognition after multiple punches to the head and shift work, and peptides. 4 months later, they did a detailed blood work again, and I was actually able to taper off 2 of the peptides because my body had responded so well to just one of them that it was optimized at that point. So I cannot speak highly enough of the immense range of supplementation that they offer, whether it's male health, female health, peptides to boost your own testosterone, which I would argue is needed by a lot of the fire service, or whether it's exogenous testosterone needed, especially after TBIs or advanced age. Now, as I mentioned before, the other side of this company is an altruistic arm called the Transcend Foundation, which is putting veterans and first responders through some of their protocols free of charge. Now, Transcend are also offering you, the audience, 10% off their protocols. And you can find that on jamesgearing.com under the Products tab. And if you want to hear more about Transcend and their story, listen to episode 808 with the founder, Ernie Colling. Or go to transcendcompany.com. Welcome to the Behind the Shield podcast. As always, my name is James Gearing, and this week it is my absolute honor to welcome on the show co-founder of Ambio and the Canadian Psychedelic Association, Trevor Millar. Now, what makes this conversation so powerful is that there are many of my guests whose lives were literally saved through Ibogaine with Ambio. So we discuss a host of topics, from Trevor's own journey into the world of psychedelics, the formation of veterans exploring treatment solutions, healing traumatic brain injury, overcoming addiction, the 343 Fund helping first responders, the failure of drug prohibition, and so much more. Now, before I get to this incredible conversation, as I say every week, please just take a moment. Go to whichever app you listen to this on, subscribe to the show, leave feedback, and leave a rating. Every single 5-star rating truly does elevate this podcast, therefore making it easier for others to find. And this is a free library of well over 1,100 episodes now. So all I ask in return is that you help share these incredible men and women's stories so I can get them to every single person on planet Earth who needs to hear them. So with that being said, I introduce to you Trevor Millar. Enjoy. Well, Trevor, I want to start by saying thank you so much for taking the time and coming on the Behind the Shield podcast today.
Thanks so much for having me, James. Excited to be here.
Likewise. So where on planet Earth are we finding you this afternoon?
I am in my home in Tijuana, Mexico, one place that I never thought I would end up living, but I've been here for 4 years and it's kind of grown on me.
Well, I want to get to your life story, but just before we do, when people hear Tijuana, I actually used to live in California, work for a fire department there, so that was definitely somewhere that the lads would go to on vacation. But then you also hear about, some of the dangers and challenges. So before we even get into what why you're there now, talk to me about living in that area. Is it as dangerous as we see on the news, or is there a little scaremongering going on?
I think there's definitely some scaremongering going on. We bump into that all the time. People scared of coming to Tijuana, and that's the first thing I say is just turn off the news. Me and my beautiful fiance have lived here for the last 4 years, and really we haven't felt unsafe for a second. I'm pretty sure the 25-year-old me could have found some trouble in Tijuana, but I think unless you're looking for it, I don't think you'll find it.
What about what's going on here with a lot of the Mexican men, women, and children that maybe not fully legally documented? Are you seeing any sort of kind of ripple effect on the other side of the border?
The only thing I saw was this hilarious billboard saying, Trump doesn't want you, we do. Come work at our call center. But that's the only thing I've seen even closely related to that on the ground here. But, I have some Mexican community for sure. A lot of Mexican community. Most of my friends down here are Mexican. But, I'm sure they and their families have probably seen more impact than I would.
Well, we'll circle around to drug prohibition and why we even see some of the issues that we do in a little bit. But let's start at the very beginning of your timeline. So tell me where you were born and tell me a little bit about your family dynamic, what your parents did, how many siblings.
Yeah, I was born in a town called Kitchener, Ontario, Canada. It is about an hour west of Toronto. And my parents are still alive. They are still married. They've been married for more than 50 years. My father is an auto mechanic by trade, and then he bought into a business that was a fuel injection repair business. So he was the co-owner of a business. So I think that's where I got a bit of my entrepreneurial spark, perhaps, was knowing that you can own your own business through seeing my dad do it. And then my mom is a nurse and a nurse practitioner. So my mom, has been a nurse for more than 40 years. She, in her later life, kind of put herself through correspondence school. So I have memories of her sitting at the table for hours on end, getting her BA, then getting her master's, and then becoming a nurse practitioner. So she's a real inspiration. And I think kind of the healing aspect of my background comes from, knowing what a nurse does and seeing my mom do that day in and day out. My sister, I have one sister. She's 3 years younger than me, 2 school years younger than me. But her name's Kristen. She's fantastic. She lives in Australia. She has 4 kids, married to a lovely dude, Bradley, and they have 3 girls, and now Cameron's the youngest boy at about 8 years old. And I'd say it was a very idyllic life growing up. There was, I can't pinpoint any serious traumatic events that happened to me. My friends, I have a super solid friend group. I was just thinking about this last night. Like, my best friends in the world are still, the 5 or 6 dudes that I grew up with. Finished high school and was never a very good academic. I didn't want to go to university. I don't know if I could have gotten in. I'm sure I could have gotten into university if I pushed, but I definitely wanted to take a year off. So for that year off, I started working the front desk at a Holiday Inn in Cambridge, Ontario. And I had been a lifeguard at that hotel growing up. That's kind of my sport, is swimming. I was a competitive swimmer. And after that year at the front desk, I had a girlfriend at the time, and she was a dancer, and she got a job dancing on cruise ships. So she basically said, I'm leaving in 2 weeks. And when she made that call, I said, I'm moving west. I had been a skier growing up as well, been skiing since I was 6 years old, and moved to the mountains. So moved to Whistler, British Columbia. And I had some friends who already had moved there, some older brothers of some buddies of mine. And I started working the Holiday Inn there. And because I had been working, I knew the systems. I was training people my first day at that hotel. So I was 19 years old, training people on the first day that I arrived, because Whistler's a very transient town. Nobody really knew the systems there. So I became the front desk manager of that hotel within a couple of months at 19 years old, which is crazy. Like, Whistler's a resort town, a lot of partying, a lot of fun. A lot of perks, and I was able to offer perks to people being this hotel manager. So I could give away hotel rooms for friends and family coming in to, people that worked around the town. So I never waited in line anywhere. I got free meals wherever I went. I had an older brother come and visit, a good buddy's older brother come and visit a couple years into that. And he's like, Trev, you like the Godfather around here. So that was pretty great at 19 years old. Thought I would stay in the hospitality industry for the rest of my life at that time, I think, but moved to Vancouver in 2001, 2000 maybe, and opened up the Hilton Hotel there. And yeah, I've gone farther than what you've been asking for. Should I pause there?
No, I've got a couple of things. So firstly, well, more current, Whistler, isn't that one of the places that has the longest ski season because of the elevation?
Yeah, I don't know that it's long. It is actually longest because the glaciers you can basically always access. Like you can ski until mid-August on the glacier. So it'll go from, it'll open up around US Thanksgiving, which is around November 22nd kind of thing. And it'll go until, the real hills, the full mountain, you're going to go until about mid-April, but you can always hit that glacier up until mid-August. It's pretty awesome.
What about, it's interesting with each of your parents, so starting with your dad first, being a mechanic and working with fuel injection specifically, what have been the conversation, if any, about the pros and cons of hybrid, electric cars, full gas, etc.?
My dad always had this line when we heard heard or smelt diesel, and he's like, it's the smell of money. So I don't know, my dad, he worked at a Ford dealership he was the service manager at a Ford dealership in the early years. And then I thought he was like a Ford man for life, but now he's driving a Honda CR-V with great mileage. I think he'd be totally into electric. He's also retired now, so he doesn't have to fear for his well-being.
What about your mother, as far as the healthcare system over the span of her career? What have been some of the observations, again, of pros and cons, etc.?
Yeah, I think she's, she's kind of like, she works in the cardiac unit, so that's her specialty. They put a lot of stents in hearts. They really do save a lot of lives through what she does. I think she retired 5 years ago, but she still works a few days a week. I think that's coming to an end pretty soon. The interesting thing around the healthcare system and her perspective on it and me is when I started working with this very obscure plant medicine and had to make the phone call to her and said, yeah, that stuff I've been posting about on Facebook. Yeah, well, I moved out of Vancouver, opened up a house providing this to people. That was kind of her stop in the tracks. Like, what are you doing? So yeah, I think we sometimes butt heads a little bit on my view of kind of healthcare and alternative healthcare, perhaps, and what the mainstream says about different medical procedures. And she is definitely more mainstream than I am. So we bump heads a little bit sometimes.
Well, what she's doing is very similar to what I did, which is, when it's too late. Like the person's come in, they're completely occluded, and she and her team are opening the vessel up and saving that life. When you call 911, my crew would arrive and whatever was needed, whether it was nitro and aspirin or whether it was a full CPR, we would try and save that person. That's amazing. But then the question has to be, well, why are people getting here? Why are so many people getting here? I think you need to have both. You need to have those life-saving people, absolutely. But where's the conversation? I quote this all the time, Desmond Tutu. We spend so much time pulling people out of the river, we forget to go upstream and find out why they're falling in the first place. I think that's exactly, her and my perspective are the reactive, but we've also got to have the proactive conversation.
Yeah, I've heard that quote before, maybe not exactly, but in related to healthcare. And that's, physicians as well, like that you graduate, you're told a certain number of things while you're at medical school, and then you get patients thrown at you and you've got no time to really consider what else is going on. I'll give my mom credit. She's incredibly healthy. She exercises. She's been an advocate for that. My parents both taught aerobics, like maybe to date myself, in the kind of the 80s. They were both aerobics teachers and very active at the YMCA near where I lived. And my mom has always been anti-smoking. Like she realizes the dangers of smoking. And it's gotten into some heated arguments with family members over that at certain times as well. So yeah, to her credit, she definitely sees that there are some upstream causes to the downstream stuff she sees in the cardiac unit.
Absolutely. Well, you took us in kind of the hotel journey. How did that then lead you to also be on a cruise ship?
Yeah, so I had that girlfriend I mentioned. She worked on cruise ships. I had another dude that I grew up with. He worked on cruise ships, and both of them came to me at various times and said, Trevor, you would really be good at this. You should look into doing this one day. So that was, so I left the hotel business. I started selling software in 2001. And that was a wild ride, and lasted about a decade or just short of that. And then I was just at a point where I was miserable in whatever job I did have. I had nothing else going on. I had no partner. And I said, it's time for me to look into cruise ships. So I reached out to that buddy, Mikey. I said, I think it's time. He pulled some strings and he got me a job. And he got me a job as the lowest rung on the entertainment staff ladder, which is cruise staff, which is basically playing Pictionary and line dancing for a living. So I was probably 32 years old, 32 or 33 at the time. And I took that job, but I said, I will become a cruise director within a year. And everybody said that's impossible. And I managed to become a cruise director within 8 months. So I kind of rounded out the last 5 years on ships being cruise director, which is actually an awesome gig. Maybe not amazing for the soul, but it's a lot of fun for sure.
I just went on Royal Caribbean, and it's funny, for some reason their cruise directors are usually British as well, but yeah, they really are the kind of, backbone of the ship. And if you ever saw that one, God, what's it called? Poop Cruise, that documentary.
I haven't pressed played on that yet. I should check it out.
That cruise director was suddenly called to earn all of their salary at that point. Let's just say that.
Cool. I'll definitely check that out.
All right. Well, then where did that lead you to?
So I think we need to step back a little bit. So I find it interesting that 9/11 impacted so many of the people that I work with now. And 9/11 really impacted me and really changed the direction of my life. Because after 9/11, before 9/11, I was addicted to the media. I would read, it was kind of pre-internet media in any large scale, but I'd read three newspapers a day. I'd get righteously pissed off at the state of the world, but I wouldn't do anything about it. And the morning of 9/11, I woke up, I turned on the news network like I always did, and I saw what happened. And a couple of months after that, I stopped in my tracks realizing, holy smokes, the media really is making me crazy. So I went on a media fast at that point, which lasted about 2 or 3 years. And I didn't read any newspaper. I didn't turn on any news network. And at the same time, I said, well, I realized the media had turned me into a passive yet obsessive observer of all that was wrong in the world. So instead I said, well, what can I do? I'll set this stuff aside, and what can I do to make the world a better place? So I turned my attention to Vancouver's downtown east side, which is known as the poorest postal code in Canada, because it is, but it's, maybe 6 to 10 square blocks of just abject poverty, very concentrated in this one neighborhood. And it's a neighborhood that ever since I moved to Vancouver and drove through the first time, I was incredibly fascinated with. And I just started looking at how I might help out in that neighborhood. And I started poking around, volunteered for a little bit with an organization, and really just took it upon myself, recognizing that I had no skills on paper that should lead me to believe in any way, shape, or form I'd be able to help this neighborhood. But I also realized that maybe that was an asset. Maybe I'd be able to have fresh eyes around this issue, which sort of came to be true. But that essentially turned into about a 10-year networking and research project. And then in 2009, so I worked on cruise ship. So 2001, this started. 2005, I made a bit of money selling stock options in a software company at a good time. I spent 4 months in Costa Rica surfing. Once there was something profound happened while I was surfing in Costa Rica, though. I was laying in a hammock. I think I'd probably just smoked a little bit of a joint. I had just been reading a book. I set down the book, and I really got overwhelmed with this feeling of complete, perfect peace and oneness. And my goal up until that point is I want to be able to afford to do nothing if I want to do it. So I had finally accomplished that goal. I was in Costa Rica doing nothing, came into this state of oneness on this hammock, finally everything I'd wanted. And then this idea crept in and said, you're not going to really be able to enjoy this until you help more people get here. And I'm like, I immediately knew that I was going to turn my attention back towards the downtown east side. So I moved back to Vancouver shortly after that. In 2005, I took about 6 months. I moved into that neighborhood for a couple of those months, and I really did intense research. But it was actually then that I ran out of money and said, I need to find a job. So that's when I started to work on cruise ships. So then after worked on cruise ships for a number of years, met the woman that I eventually married, now my ex-wife, but Becky, she's wonderful. We're still very good friends. We threw a happy divorce party when it happened. But we moved back to Vancouver in 2009. And in 2009, I put my boots to the ground in the downtown east side again, had a conversation with a woman down there who ran a nonprofit called the Vancouver Area Network of Drug Users. And I was just speaking to her about things that I might do to help and that I was keen to help. And did she have any ideas? And she really didn't, but we had a lovely conversation that went on for like 3 hours. She's a real force of nature down there. Ann Livingston is her name. But the whole time I was speaking to her, there was a binder on the wall behind her that said Ibogaine on it. And I said, just near the end of that conversation, what about Ibogaine? And she says, actually, I have people calling me for that all the time. And I said, let me follow that thread. And everything good in my life now has come out of that decision.
Well, let's go back for a second. Is it Vancouver that Dr. Gabor Mate is from?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So he wrote a book called In the Realm of the Hungry Ghosts, which was all about his 12 years working in this neighborhood, the downtown east side. And it was great, actually. Once we set up, we can get to the details of this, but I ended up setting up a business providing Ibogaine to people in Vancouver. Was introduced to Gabor very quickly after that. And he said, I'll do whatever I can to help you guys out. Let me know what you need. So he helped find us a physician that worked with us for the 5 years we were operating there. And him and I have just become really good buddies. We've actually done Ibogaine together. We took a week and did it together with a buddy of mine. So we have the same birthday as well. But yeah, we just get along like a house on fire when we are in touch.
Yeah, he's an amazing guy, and he along with Johan Hari, I'll credit Johan's book Chasing the Scream is really what opened my eyes to, the epic failure of the prohibition of drugs overall, and some of the healing modalities that are out there. So going back to when you kind of first found yourself in Vancouver, what were you seeing? Because we are sold this bill of goods that, if you're just tough on crime and you're tough on addicts and you don't waste Narcan on them and all this kind of two-dimensional bullshit, that this is a success. But you ask anyone, even, it's amazing, even the law enforcement community now, when they come on, they have a very different picture of the success of this. So in this environment where supposedly we can arrest our way out of addiction, what were you seeing with your own eyes in the city of Vancouver?
Yeah, for one, I know, like from speaking to Ann Livingston in particular, she really talks about how the legal system is just bent against any good happening. Like people will get arrested, miss a court date because they don't keep calendars. Then they'll have another warrant out for their arrest. And it's just this constant rotation of their life being dragged down and down and down further through the legal system, which is really sad. And that's not necessarily always the approach in Vancouver as well. Vancouver is very harm reduction focused. And I think there's a fine line to walk there. Like Vancouver Area Network of Drug Users, what they would do when I first encountered them, they're probably still doing the same, is they would pay people a stipend of even like $2 or $3 to come in to sit and listen to a meeting where maybe somebody's presenting that, how to use your needle cleanly so that you don't get infection, or how to use your crack pipe properly so that you don't get sick from that. It's also been a force for helping people organize, and bureaucrats make decisions that impact lives dramatically. Like they switched the whole population from methadone to methadose, thinking they're kind of the same thing, but there were radical withdrawals. Like the whole neighborhood went crazy for a few weeks during that switchover. So I am all for harm reduction, and I am all for really doing what we can to get people treatment that works as well. Because there's, something's not working. As much compassion and as I've seen cities of Vancouver have for the people that use drugs there, it's still a disaster zone. It's still like Armageddon when you go down there.
I sat with João Goulão, who's the man who spearheaded decriminalization in Portugal when I went to Lisbon a few years ago. And it was amazing to hear what made them change. And it was simply they, like most of the world, had been kind of forced into the prohibition model after, Anslinger's war on drugs from the 30s. And they had the humility as a nation to say, this isn't working. And this was back, I think it was like 2000 or late 90s. And so they got together truly democratically and actually asked the people, and their vote actually counted, and put it to a vote. Well, what if we do a different model? What if we look at the addict as a patient and put it in the hands of the medical community? We're not going to legalize it. So it's not going to be, like you can go into the grocery store and buy crystal meth and, all these other things. But if you are caught with a true user's amount, you are not even detained. You will be taken in and giving basically an education on all the resources that are available to you. And within less than 10 years, about 8 years, they went from the worst crisis in, I think it was either Europe or the world, let's say it's Europe, to the lowest. Because what they did is they put the money into the resources. I think this is what a lot of the countries that try this don't do. They take the money, they put it into creation of addiction counseling, mental health counseling, housing, job creation, all these things that we know help put a human being back on their feet. There are still addicts in Portugal that they just weren't able to save. It's always got to be, talked about. You can't get every single person, and you don't point at the few that it didn't work for and say it doesn't work. But they had huge success. And I actually had João on a few months ago again, kind of revisiting it. Because it was doing so well, there were some cuts made. It started getting worse again, and then now they're putting the money back in. They're like, okay, we have to keep funding this. But this is what I think the world needs to hear: is there are countries around the world that have found that if you invest in these people and you take away the stigma of having the audacity to be an addict, and you're not fearing arrest, so you get this, like you said, revolving door of criminality and criminal records. Most people want to get healed. Most people want to get back on their feet. But this prohibition model, whether it's a Portuguese soldier coming back from Africa a few decades ago, whether it's a Navy SEAL or a firefighter here today, it's the same thing. If you stigmatize addiction, you send them into the hands of the underworld, which again, as we alluded to at the beginning of this conversation, then empowers cartels and other groups, and they get stronger.
Yeah. Yeah, I think Portugal seems to be doing it way better than anybody else, that's for sure. And I think I think the end goal needs to be helping to get people rehabilitated and back into society as a functional citizen. And I think that is what's missing a lot, especially here on the West Coast. Like there's this almost political ideology that says, no, the system's broken. You need to fix the system first. It's not even fair to ask these people to get better. Michael Schellenberger's book, San Francisco, really kind of hits on that. And yeah, so I think the end goal is the betterment of the individual. I think that's the only sane end goal. And I think the repercussions of that is society gets better. But you work on the individual, you focus on the individual. I have seen what modern Western medicine would call miracles with this medicine that we work with. So it's it's doable, and a system can be built up around doing it, and it should be. And I think taking something like what Portugal has done and injecting maybe some large scale use of a plant medicine like Ibogaine would be profound.
Absolutely. And just to quote Johan Hari again, the opposite of addiction is not sobriety. The opposite of addiction is connection. So if we're isolating and shaming the addict, we're making it worse. If you encircle them with healing, whether it's the community itself or some of the tools like Ibogaine, then what are you doing? You're forging healing that way too.
Yeah. And you have to recognize that, like a couple of things. For one, I have met more than one person that said, cocaine saved my life. I would have killed myself a long time ago if it weren't for the relief I got from cocaine, or insert any drug in there. I know plenty of people like that. I think the other thing you really need to do is find compassion for people who use all drugs because of what I just said. These folks are self-medicating trauma that society or their lives, obviously their lives, gave them. But to look at somebody like an opiate addict in particular, with other drugs, there might be some aspect of kind of the classic, well, why don't you just stop? Just stop. It's obviously not working for you. Just stop the stuff. That's maybe somewhat fair to say with certain substances, but opioids give you, when you stop them, the most painful withdrawals, this incredible sickness that goes on for weeks, months, even years with post-acute withdrawal symptoms. So again, thank God for Ibogaine. We'll get into that. But to say to somebody that it kind of just takes away the morality around it. Like there's no moral degeneracy in just trying to self-medicate this incredible pain that, you probably didn't know was going to come. Heroin seems to work for people for the first little while. It's once you've been on it for weeks at a time and then try and stop, and there's this incredible sickness that comes with it. And that sickness will disappear if you just take a little bit more heroin. I think it's easy to find compassion for people like that. The other one is that people are getting hooked on right now that they have no idea that they're even hooked on it is kratom or kratom, depending on how you want to pronounce it. But kratom is, I call it gas station heroin, because it is a coffee plant. It hits the opioid receptors. It's available in almost every gas station in the United States right now. It's available in these lovely little shots that make you feel really good, and they make you feel really good because it's hitting those opioid receptors. But just like anything that hits the opioid receptors, you take it long enough and your own body shuts down its own endogenous opiate making system, and then you need that from the outside, and then all of a sudden you're dependent. But because this stuff's so readily available, people don't even recognize that they're dependent because they haven't had to try and stop before. It tastes great, or it doesn't really taste great, it tastes like crap, but it makes me feel great, and I'll just keep taking it. We just treated a guy a couple of weeks ago who I think they just outlawed the particular alkaloid out of this, which was available in gas stations as well, 7-OH. But this guy was taking this 7-OH stuff, had no idea. He heard somebody say something about tapering off of it. He's like, taper off of it? Why do I have to taper off it? He thought he could just stop. He was in a hospital for 10 days with debilitating withdrawals because of the stuff that he was taking. And yeah, nobody's kind of warning people that that stuff's highly addictive. Kind of the opposite. I was just at a psychedelic conference in June in Denver, and our booth was near a stage, and I heard this woman from the, I don't know, kratom industry saying that, yes, it's addictive, but so is coffee. If you don't drink coffee or if you do drink coffee regularly and you stop it for a couple of days, you're going to have withdrawals. I'm like, no, it is not the same thing, lady. Almost half of the people we treat at Ambio in our detox program now is kratom, because
Really?
they tried to stop, they can't. It's crazy. So people get their backs up though, man, when I talk about this. I've tried to dip into a few online conversations about this, and people defend this stuff like crazy. I'm like, I've had it a few times myself. It's kind of fun. I don't drink alcohol anymore, so to be able to relax with something like that is kind of neat. I also know that if you take it frequently, you're going to become dependent on it, and that's just how it is. It's an opioid.
I had a guy, I don't know, I'm forgetting his last name, Chris, who was member of a powerlifting family. I'm blanking on his name. Yes, Chris Bell. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you. So Chris was on, and at that time he was talking about how successful kratom was, and I think he had the same journey, because I think we spoke later. But I had another guest on the show that kratom almost killed him, and he was in rehab for weeks trying to get off the stuff. So this is what's interesting. I've kind of heard both sides. Chris's was quite early on in the whole kratom conversation. But I would imagine if you talk to him, he's got a very different story now too.
I've met Chris. Yeah, Chris has spent some time down here. He had a camera following him. Hopefully that movie gets made in the end. I think there were funding issues or something. But he made a movie called Leaf of Faith, which was on Netflix, which was all about kratom and how wonderful it is. And it is wonderful if you're looking within the context of pain relief, temporary pain relief, perhaps. But the tune changed over the years for sure. As he realized, wow, this is a bit more of a beast than he originally thought. It only mentioned the potential of it being addictive once in that movie, Leaf of Faith, where it's hard to come off of.
Absolutely. All right. Well, you mentioned about seeing a binder. Ibogaine was written on. You're about to pull that thread. So kind of walk us through the journey you found about that specific plant medicine. Yeah.
So I guess, first of all, I had exposure to psychedelics at a fairly young age. In the mid-90s, there was a famous LSD chemist named Nicholas Sands who was escaping the cops in the States and moved to British Columbia, to Coquitlam. And he and a guy that I'm now friends with, Peter Vanderheyden, produced millions of hits of LSD, and it just flooded the market. So if you look at a graph, there was a peak of LSD use in the late 60s, early 70s. Then there was a peak in the mid 90s when I was in high school. So I had exposure to them. I kind of grew up on the just say no to drugs propaganda. I thought that was effective propaganda at the time. I would have told you that I would have never tried drugs as a kid. But LSD was different. I knew the Beatles used LSD. There was some kind of an interest. So the very first opportunity to have that, I took it. And we used it a little bit as kids, as young men. And I didn't know about the therapeutic potential of it, but I remember saying to my buddies that this is what adults have forgotten that has made the world so screwed up. So it's kind of therapeutic nature bled through into what it was doing for us. And then I moved to Vancouver in 2001, as I said, and there was a shop that I discovered called the Urban Shaman. And the Urban Shaman sold a whole bunch of legal entheogenic plants, like salvia was legal at the time. The first time I went in there, that's what I bought, Salvia divinorum. And that place had a bit of a community around it that I hung out there a lot. And that was the first time I heard about Iboga. Ibogaine comes from Iboga. And I heard it was a long trip, 24 hours long, and it cost $500 a dose. So I was broke at the time and definitely not interested in a 24-hour long psychedelic journey. So I ironically now said, I'm definitely never trying that one. But I think around the same time, I heard that there was a potential for it helping with opioid use disorder. And, but I never really put two and two together that it might be helpful for this downtown East Side neighborhood until that meeting in 2009. This binder on the wall behind her said Ibogaine. She said, people are calling me for that all the time because there was an Ibogaine treatment center on Vancouver Island, which had shut down, but the website was still up. And the website had Anne's name on it saying, we're closed, but if you're looking for more information, maybe Anne could call you. So it was basically a pipeline. And then from then on, anytime somebody called her, she would forward them to me. I did give it to a couple of people out of the gate. Thankfully, nobody got hurt. I quickly realized I had no idea what I was doing. So when people called, I would basically say, you should go to Mexico if you're going to do it on your own. Here's what little I know. In 2012, I got a call from Anne. She said, there's an Ibogaine providers conference in town. Did you know? I said, no. She said, I put your name on the list as a provider. You should go down. So I went down and spent the next 4 days with people I now know are kind of the OGs of Ibogaine providing. The guy running that conference was named Jonathan Dickinson, a fellow Canadian. I met a guy named Gareth at the conference. Gareth became my first business partner. Gareth had been to Mexico, had apprenticed with people, knew what he was doing with the medicine, really wanted to provide it in Canada. And it was legal to provide it in Canada at the time. It was listed as a natural health product, which meant there were some gray areas we were skirting on the importation of it, but ultimately it was legal to work with in Canada. So we came together, we set up my first business, Liberty Root Therapy Limited, in 2012, shortly after that conference. Basically, this guy said, I really want to work with it. I said, well, my phone's still ringing. The next time the phone rings, let's see what we can do to help them out. The next time the phone rang, it was a father calling on behalf of his two sons, 28-year-old son, 30-year-old son, and the 28-year-old's girlfriend, all heroin users. And we treated them over the course of a couple of weekends. It went really well. We said there's obviously a need for this in Vancouver. So my wife at the time was still working on cruise ships. She was leaving for 6 months at a time. I said, let's get out of Vancouver, out of the downtown core. And we moved to White Rock, about an hour south of there, and found a really nice townhome to work out of, a new condo townhome, 3-bedroom. We used the master bedroom as the treatment room. We each took a bedroom, and we just started treating people. We treated one person at a time, 7 days at a time to start, mostly for opioid use disorder. We had Gabor Mate introduced us to the physician we worked with, Caroline Ferris, for a number of years. She would prescribe anything that we needed. So with Ibogaine, if somebody's using opiates, you don't want to just rush into Ibogaine. So you need something to stabilize them on. So they might come in using heroin. Then we give them morphine for a few days, stabilize them on the morphine that the doctor prescribed, and then we go in with Ibogaine. And Yeah, we did about 75 people in 2 years through that first house, and then graduated to a larger house where we could take up to 3 people at a time. We also realized we learned a lot along the way, obviously. We learned that 7 days is too short. We would bring people in for 10-day programs. We were nowhere near as medicalized as we are now. But I would bring in a nurse. A nurse friend of mine would come in for the actual Ibogaine treatment itself. He would analyze EKGs and things like that. Yeah, so then we did 3 people at a time for another couple of years. It brought us up to, we treated about 200 people in the 5 years that we were legally operating in Canada. And then in 2017, Health Canada changed the regulatory status of Ibogaine. They realized it was misclassified. A natural health product is something that is like vitamin C or some kind of a supplement available over the counter, not dangerous. Whereas Ibogaine is potentially dangerous, they realized the misclassification. Kudos to them, they could have just outlawed it. They didn't. Instead, they put it on the prescription drug list. So it's on the prescription drug list, but because it hasn't gone through clinical trials, it's still not available as a prescription. So it's in this no-go zone in Canada, but at least because it's not illegal, we can research it without too much fanfare. Like we're working with Dalhousie University in Canada right now, doing some research on Ibogaine for MS. So, you know, they didn't have to jump through the red tape of working with a medicine that's outlawed, unlike the States currently.
Now, if I've got my facts correct, and I might not have, the Iboga plant is in Africa originally?
Yeah, so it is a plant that has been used ceremonially for centuries in countries like Gabon and Cameroon in West Africa. It is, the plant is called Tabernanthe Iboga, and if you were to use it in the jungle, it's the second layer of root bark on this plant, and they peel it off and you have to eat copious amounts of it. And they've been using it for initiation, for healing, for studying life. The tradition that grew out of the use of this medicine is called the Bwiti tradition, and they would tell you that the Bwiti means study of life. So that's what they use it for there. And then you can extract, there's a dozen or so alkaloids in that plant, and you can extract the individual alkaloids. Ibogaine is one of those alkaloids. And in the early 1960s, a gentleman by the name of Howard Lotsoff, he was a 19-year-old in New York City, dependent on heroin, but he was meeting with a chemist buddy of his, and this chemist buddy pulled this stuff out of his freezer. We have no idea where he got it, but he said, "You might find this interesting. This stuff's called Ibogaine. You should give it a go." He knew Howard was interested in different substances. So Howard one day tried Ibogaine, and he went on this intense journey. It is long, like I say, it's about 24 to 36 hours. He had no idea what he was getting into. He came out the other end, he said, "Wow, I'm never doing that again." But he said he stepped outside and he felt this incredible peace that he had never felt before. He's trying to put his finger on, how do I feel? And it's like, I'm at peace. That's when he realized, wait a second, I haven't wanted heroin the whole time I've been on this, nor do I want it now. So that's when its anti-addictive properties were discovered. And thankfully, Howard over the years became a big champion for what he had discovered and knocked on a lot of doors, got some people to pay attention. And then in the kind of late 80s, maybe early 90s, some Ibogaine clinics started popping up around the world in places where it was legal to do that. And there was definitely some underground work happening in the States as well. It was outlawed in the States in 1972 at the same time that, you know, the sweeping Psychedelics Act happened. Anything that was deemed psychedelic was made illegal. I think it's interesting to note that before that, before the late 60s, early 70s, psychedelics were always looked upon as pro-social, whether it's indigenous communities using them to heal individuals or the community. Even Western culture had the mysteries of Eleusis out of Greek culture. It was a 2,000-year-old tradition. It was considered the most important aspect of Greek culture, but it was kind of like Fight Club. You couldn't write about it, you couldn't talk about it, but every citizen had to go through it. And we now know that the kykeon, the potion that was drank at the Mysteries of Eleusis, was contained an LSD type substance in it. So my theory is that the Greeks, who created a lot of the structures that we know and love, whether it's our way of governing, our seeds of our democracy, the way we educate, I don't think they ever intended those structures to be separated from the psychedelic experience. Psychedelic means mind or soul manifesting. So the word has a lot of baggage, but I think it's actually the correct term to use, because at least what's happening with these substances are a different level of mind is being presented. But in 1972, psychedelics were made illegal in the States. So it's not available legally in the United States, but there was an interesting thing that happened, an interesting loophole kind of that we're operating from, is the UN also has treaties making most drugs illegal across the world. Thankfully, Ibogaine never got put on that list. So each country kind of gets to decide where Ibogaine stands. In Mexico, where we're operating right now, it's just unregulated. It's not on any list. It's not completely legal. It's not completely illegal. It's just not on any list. So we operate down here as a licensed mental health and addiction facility, and Ibogaine just happens to be a certain thing that we use in the process.
So how did you find yourself moving to Mexico and opening the facility?
Yeah, so in 2017, Health Canada changed the regulatory status of Ibogaine. It was good timing for me. I feel like the universe really had my back. In April of 2017, I decided I needed a break anyway, so I shut down the operation. I wasn't paying $5,000 per month rent come May, once the memo came out from Health Canada. I also found it interesting that Health Canada, I had been in touch with them, so I don't know if any other providers had, but they changed the regulatory status, but then they didn't reach out to tell us it was changed. I happened to have a friend who caught the news release. It wasn't even a news release. It was just a post on a website. Anyway, after that happened, I continued to be active in the psychedelic community in Vancouver, of which there is a rich one. I was the chair of the board of directors for MAPS Canada. So I was invited to be on the board, and a couple months later to be chair of the board for MAPS Canada. MAPS is the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, started by Rick Doblin in the States in the early 1980s. And he's done a lot to really promote psychedelics as therapeutics. And Rick sat on the board for MAPS Canada as well, which was just a little tiny branch of MAPS. And during that time, I also co-founded the Canadian Psychedelic Association, which is still a prominent force in Canada. But through MAPS, I got a call one day from Rick Doblin. And when Rick calls, you answer. So I picked up the phone, and he said, I have this lovely couple in my living room, Amber and Marcus Capone. Marcus is a former Navy SEAL. They've started a nonprofit sending Special Forces veterans for Ibogaine treatment. You guys should know each other. So took that call, had a great chat with them there. And then from that point forward, Amber was very diligent in calling me every month to 2 months to see if there might be a way for us to work together. I thought, and the conversation started with just looking at different ways that we might be able to do something in Canada. They would have preferred to have sent their vets to Canada rather than Mexico. But the regulatory status had just been changed. It basically would boil down to needing to do a clinical trial, which would have been super expensive. So I just thought, there's no way I'm going to work with these folks in Canada. But then I had a phone call with them in, would have been December of 2020. And there was just something Amber said on this call where I realized, oh, it's not Canada they want. I think they're just looking to work with me. So I hung up the phone. I spoke to my lady, Brianna. I'm like, I think that I'm going to call her back. So I called Amber back. I'm like, is it just me you're looking to work with? It doesn't matter where. She's like, yes. I'm like, okay, cool. Well, let me see if I can find a place to work. So Brianna and I had already planned on going to Costa Rica in 2021. We wanted to escape the COVID mayhem. So we spent some time while we were in Costa Rica. I was also at the time the chief psychedelic officer for a publicly traded company called Neon Mind. So that kind of was floating the boat at that point. But I was in Costa Rica looking at how to set up there. I realized there were a lot of barriers to me setting up there. I didn't have a network. I didn't speak the language. But while I was there, I was speaking to Jonathan Dickinson, who I mentioned ran that first Ibogaine conference. And he asked me to be on the board of directors of another nonprofit he was starting. And we were talking about that. And I just happened to mention this veterans group that was keen to work with me. And he called me back a week later with a guy named Jose Inzunza in the car with him. They were both in Tijuana. Jonathan had been in Tijuana for a number of years. Jose is a paramedic. He had a clinic providing Ibogaine in Tijuana to people, mostly for opioid use disorder. And they called me and said, hey man, why don't you move to Tijuana? We've got all the medical equipment required. We've got all the medical staff that understands the medicine. We can find a house dedicated to veterans. And I checked with Brianna. I said, Tijuana? She said, whatever it takes for the medicine. So we went back to Canada for a few months, got things settled there, and then moved down here in July of 2021, which again was just a nightmare. The insanity of COVID. I just wanted to drive my truck down and bring all my stuff. So I'm doing that probably in June. And we got turned around and said, no, essential services only. So the next time I hit the border, it was with a letter from Navy SEALs, saying essential service. At least this time they pulled us in for an hour before turning us around. So you couldn't cross the land border unless you were an essential service. But we drove back to Vancouver, packed our stuff a different way, and flew in the next day. So flew to San Diego, which, just the insanity of that. You couldn't drive, but you could fly. So flew into San Diego, walked across the border to Tijuana. Jonathan picked us up. That was a Saturday. We got to TJ. Sunday, I bought a car at this used car market for a couple of grand. Monday, we welcomed our first group of veterans from Vets Incorporated into the detox house that Jose had. And we treated our first two groups through that house. And in that time, we found the house, which we still have, which you'll see if you watch a movie coming on Netflix November 3rd called In Waves and War. That'll be the house that we picked up then. So yeah, it's been wild.
Well, I've had so many people on the show that have gone through vets. I never thought, 8 years ago that I'd know so many Navy SEALs, but I do now.
Welcome to my world.
Exactly, it's crazy. Yeah. But this is what's brought us together. Everything, the parallels in uniform, whether it's the service and the PTSD and all these other things, or whether it's the addiction, or whether it's the healing modalities and breath work and all these other areas. But when it comes to Ibogaine specifically, a huge takeaway is obviously that addiction piece. And what I hear not only is opioids, but also alcoholism as well, which is rife in my profession and other first responder professions. So talk to me about that. You kind of were initially going in with this strong experience of opioids. What were you seeing as far as other addictions and health issues that you started seeing resolved through this practice?
Yeah, it's just a profound negative pattern interrupter. Whatever you've got going on, if you go into Ibogaine with the intent to interrupt that negative pattern, Ibogaine seems to be able to give you the leg up on doing that. Alcohol, absolutely. I stopped drinking alcohol because of an Ibogaine journey. I had a journey probably 8 or 9 years ago now. All this stuff came up around my drinking. I had no intent or desire to stop drinking. I drank a lot, but so did everybody else I know. It was the culture, especially in a place like cruise ships or the military or the fire department. What do? You go out for a drink after your shift. And yeah, the world at large never told me I had a drinking problem, but something within me knew that it wasn't right. And, I have spiritual beliefs as well. And I felt as though the way I was drinking wasn't aligned with my spiritual beliefs. And this one Ibogaine journey, all this stuff came up around my drinking. My grandfather, who's deceased, died when I was in grade 4, but he's a World War II vet. And he came to me in the journey and said, Trevor, you need to stop drinking for my lineage, which was pretty powerful. Then it was a guided journey. And the guy I was working with that was guiding me, he had me fly into my front yard. He said, is there a tree there? There was, and it was a cherry tree, and it was the time of the year that it was flowering. So it was this big pink cherry tree. And he said, give that tree a hug. So I gave the tree a hug. And then he told me to ask the tree a question about, the first question was to ask the tree what the purpose of life is. I asked the tree, and the tree said, to flower, which was just a perfect answer from a flowery tree. And then the next question was around negative tendencies and how to get rid of them in your life. And I asked the question, and the tree said, stop watering your weeds. And again, that spoke to me about alcohol. I wasn't necessarily hungover after the bottle of wine, but I was definitely watering my depression, watering my procrastination. And I spoke to Mark the next morning, the guy that gave me the medicine. I said, all this stuff came up around my drinking. And he had quit drinking. That's why he came to Iboga in the first place years ago. And he said, there's an argument to be made because of the nature of the work that we've chosen, that we need to hold ourselves to a certain standard. So I agreed with that. I said, okay, maybe I'll try and stop drinking. So went home, went to bed. Actually, on the way home, I had an urge to go and drink. Just out of habit. I had a bar I went to. There were nice girls working behind the bar. Felt like doing that. And thankfully, I called Mark. He said, well, you don't have to stop forever, but maybe at least while this medicine's in your system, give it a break. I agreed with him. I went home. I went to bed. I woke up the next morning and all desire to drink was completely gone. So that's been amazing, not having that in my life. And we see it again and again. So many people come for alcohol. The thing with alcohol and Ibogaine is you need to be able to stop for at least a week prior to arrival, because alcohol detox can be extremely dangerous. So you can't be in any kind of detox type situation. So if you're here to stop drinking, you need to be able to safely stop for at least 10 days, 7 to 10 days prior to arrival. But, I think you've spoken to Angela Scudin from the 343 Fund. And it's a nonprofit that sends first responders down here for this treatment. And just as 45 minutes before we hopped on this, I said, remind me of some good firefighter stories, guys that have been through. And every single one she brought up is guys who have been able to stop drinking. Some guy who had been to rehab 7 times. Another guy who had been to the Brain Center for Excellence. Nothing was working. Nothing worked again and again and again. And 1 dose of Ibogaine, plus some integration, coaching, and really wanting to change. And you're really able to make it happen. I always say that Ibogaine gives you the superpower of saying no to the first drink. It makes it really easy to say no to that first drink. And you can say no to that first drink into perpetuity. But if you say yes to that first drink, there's probably going to be a second. Maybe you'll wait a couple of months before it comes, but you've kind of opened up that gateway, and then the third comes super quick after the second, for sure.
I had Dan Cirillo on the show, and sadly he passed away a little while ago. But Navy SEAL, very, very powerful. Again, like so many people in uniform, it's a lot of the childhood trauma that's powerful too. That's really kind of the, the pea beneath the mattress, if you like. But the alcoholism was definitely his. I can't remember if he had opioids as well, but he literally went in as an alcoholic and left not touching a drop. And I'd hear that story over and over again. But many times I also heard people that were literally on their last straw. Like, if this doesn't work, then I'm done. I'm going to take my own life. So whether it's fire, Navy SEALs, what are some of the success stories that really struck you? What are some of the arguably the most powerful success stories that you've seen over the last few years?
Yeah, just the mention of suicide. For some reason, as a young man, as I was trying to figure out what to do with my life, there was just nothing that broke my heart more than the idea of suicide. So I'm like, if there's any way I can have an impact on that, please let me have an impact. And to have found Ibogaine and hear the stories. One of them is a guy, Mikey McKim. He's been public with his story. He's a VETS grant recipient. You can find his story on their website, I'm sure, or their YouTube channel. But he was driving to the beach, which was 3 hours away, to take his own life. Right before he left for that drive, a friend reached out to him and said, "Hey, you should listen to this." And it was episode 30 of the Sean Ryan Show, the episode that I was on. And he listened to that 2.5-hour podcast. He got to the beach. He decided, I'm going to try this instead. He came, he had Ibogaine. It changed everything. He has now worked with us a number of times. He's a public spokesperson for VETS. He has learned, I think it's the heart math solution. So he's done training in this somatic technique on how to ground yourself and get the wisdom from the body. So just, a complete 180 from a guy like that. The other one, this guy was actually here the exact same week as Mikey, but the group left and he was just really in dire straits. He was a firefighter actually. And he had basically lost, he was a veteran as well, but he'd lost all his friends while serving in the military. His best friend had died of an opioid overdose the week before arriving. And he was desperate, like so many people. Either this works or I'm going to go eat a bullet. They all left on the Saturday morning they would have left on. And the housekeeper came downstairs I was sitting there with my medical manager. The housekeeper came downstairs with a few things, and one of them was a bullet. And I'm like, where did this come from? And she showed me his nameplate, the paper nameplate. I messaged him and I said, "Hey, dude, is this what I think it is?" He said, "Yeah, I won't be needing it anymore." And just again and again and again, stories like that. People always ask me, what's the youngest you've treated? The youngest I've treated is a guy who walked in the front door on his 18th birthday. He was the son of a guy that we had treated, and he was depressed, suicidal, came in for treatment. It went incredible. He went home. He messaged us all saying that he just burnt his suicide note. He won't be needing it anymore. So yeah, it's wild, man. It's I feel incredibly blessed to have been put on a pathway that has such a profound effect on people. And again, I don't take claim for any of it. I feel as though, as the start of the story kind of implied, I feel like I'm a pretty good hotel manager, a pretty good hospitality manager. I can set up a really nice space for people to come. And then I feel as though this medicine, but more than the medicine, it's the person themselves. They do all the heavy lifting. I'm allergic to somebody saying, "You saved my life." I'm like, no, man, you saved your own life. You did all the heavy lifting on that. So I don't need much credit. I'll take credit as a good hospitality manager.
It is amazing to hear, though. Even when you had your experience and you had your World War II veteran grandfather come to you, I think this is something that really needs to be discussed now. But also, as you're talking about whether it's plant medicine and integration or some of these other tools, that is an amazing way of stopping the hurting, but also identifying the generational trauma that exists with so many people. Like, we had a world war 80 years ago. And most of our ancestors were fighting in that war. And you're telling me they just came home and everything was fine? No, of course not. The dominoes kept falling. So the combination of really giving yourself grace and understanding that what you experience, what your parents experience, this all factors into part of this equation. But then knowing that there are these tools to stop that domino from falling and then heal, so it doesn't then go to your children and your grandchildren. I think you put those together and you really have a healing superpower then.
Yeah, it's my grandfather. I was always told growing up that he didn't see much action, and then that was corrected, and he saw tons of action. And he came back from the war, didn't know what that was, spent the rest of his life going from Legion to Legion, Royal Canadian Legion or whatever Legion in whatever country he was visiting, and just would connect with veterans. And those were the only guys he would talk to about it. But he self-medicated with a case of beer a night, a 2-4 of beer. And that actually led to me not, I don't know, what it did various things. My mother, that seriously impacted my mother. My grandpa wasn't a horrible drunk. He was relatively friendly, but him drinking a case of beer a night really impacted her. So when I grew up, I heard all the time, don't do that, you'll get addicted. Don't do that, you'll get addicted. And on one hand, that really made me conscious when I did start experimenting. On the other hand, it made me super curious. Like, what is this forbidden fruit addiction that I'm not supposed to experience? So I think that, the lack of severe trauma in my life, plus my mother really drilling that into me. Like, I used copious amounts of recreational drugs as a young man. Like, it was insane at certain stages. And never opioids, thankfully. They weren't around quite as much, especially on the more East Coast where I grew up and at that time. But that also gave me incredible compassion for people who did. Like, when I saw that downtown East Side for the first time, my heart went out to those people suffering, because I recognized on some level that, maybe they probably did have a traumatic childhood. In fact, years later, I saw a study that was a longitudinal study of residents of that neighborhood that showed that 100% of the people that had been in this study also had traumatic brain injury. So, what came first, the traumatic brain injury or the addiction? Most likely it's the traumatic brain injury. And then again, you're self-medicating with these substances. And that's another thing that, we started treating people for addiction. It's where my heart still lies in a lot of ways. But then in working with these veterans and working with Ambio Marcus and then Stanford University, and seeing that, it's not just addiction, it's not just PTSD, there's brain damage, there's traumatic brain damage that's showing up on brain scans, and then brain scans after Ibogaine showing that brain damage is largely gone. So pretty profound.
What's interesting with my community is, even though traditionally we don't have the same head trauma that, obviously tier 1 special operations would, SWAT, etc., but we arguably probably some of the most woefully sleep deprived of any population. And if you look at the physiology sleep deprivation and head trauma kind of mirror each other as far as a demyelination of the myelin sheath of the nerves.
Wow.
So even though, and I did combat sports, I was a stuntman, so I probably did get quite a lot of head trauma myself. But, even if you weren't getting hit in the head a lot in your profession, if you are not sleeping every third day for 10, 20, 30 years, if you did brain scans of firefighters, you probably see a similar type of thing. So This is what's exciting, whether it's psilocybin or Ibogaine, that we're seeing this kind of plasticity, this regrowth of brain tissue or nerves that when I was in scientific school years and years ago, we were told once you lose it, you lose it. Well, that's not the case. There is hope that we can actually start regenerating.
Yeah, even with the interesting, so the Stanford study, that was one of the carrots that was really dangled by Amber Capone in the beginning. When we started talking, she said, we're trying to get this study done with Stanford. We've got the funding. We just need to put the team together. So I very much wanted to be a part of that Stanford study. I mentioned I didn't go to university, but I have a big chip on my shoulder. I wanted to be at least as successful as my friends who did. So I read a lot of books. I'm, kind of highly self-educated in a lot of different ways, but being published now in 4 medical journals really works for the ego on a certain level, but including in Nature Medicine with Stanford University. So that was one of the carrots that was dangled. And that Stanford study was basically 30 US Special Forces veterans. They went to Stanford prior to coming to my company, Ambio, and they got brain scans. They got a battery of other tests. They needed a TBI to get into the study. And then they went immediately back to Stanford after leaving. They got brain scans. They got a battery of other tests. And then there was a month follow-up as well. So the pre-brain scans were clearly showing traumatic brain injury. Post-brain scans showing it was largely reversed, if not entirely reversed in some of those guys. The first paper that came out on that measured PTSD, depression, anxiety, and disability scores, all went from almost off the charts down to next to nothing after Ibogaine. An interesting one there was the disability score, which is actually how they measure the TBI. And immediately following Ibogaine, that disability score didn't change very much at all. It was the month follow-up that the disability score dropped dramatically in the majority of those guys. So Ibogaine stays in your system, keeps doing something. They took those brain scans, they ran them through an AI algorithm that determines the age of the brain. The brains on average got 1.37 years younger after just 1 dose of Ibogaine. And that's the average. So some of those brains were looking 5 years younger. Former Texas Governor Rick Perry has been public about this in the New York Times recently, but he came down to Ambio for treatment, and he knows how to get what he wants. So he got a brain scan prior to coming in, and then a brain scan 6 months after. And the first brain scan showed the brain of an average 72-year-old. The post-brain scans showed no signs of aging. His neurologist says this is like the brain of a 45-year-old. So all that to say, you mentioned the gray matter and neuroplasticity. We know that psilocybin, we know a few different things. We know even a good meditation practice can change the neuroplasticity on the gray matter. But before this study with Stanford, we had never seen anything that actually changed the white matter. And the white matter is more of the ingrained information superhighways. And the Stanford study showed that the white matter increased in volume after Ibogaine as well, which is, we don't know of any other substance on earth that can do that. So pretty freaking crazy.
Well, it's exciting to hear, the former governor and some of the other voices in Texas trying to really push this through. And I've highlighted this many times, the kind of insanity that our men and women, especially in the military, will, fight, die, lose limbs, have mental health issues for this country. And then the ones that come home then have to go overseas to get help for it. It's crazy. So I hope that these conversations and some of these voices now in all different walks of life are really going to start shifting the way we look at prohibition. Because crystal meth, should not be on the shelf of the local supermarket. There are nuances in between, but there are so many healing modalities, MDMA, psilocybin, Cambo, all these other ones that we hear about as well, that should be accessible to everyone, whether they served or not.
Yeah, absolutely. There's incredible irony that, especially when we're working with police officers down here, and we work with a lot of police officers, but police officers who have spent their careers, chasing after people who use substances like this, but then they can come down to a place like Ambio, receive this, and kind of reset the system and see what's beautiful again. But yeah, Ambio has really become the safe haven for first responders, for veterans. That's kind of the niche that we grew out of through our relationship with Amber and Marcus. So it's just, it's sad that they have to come down here to take this medicine. And it's a real honor for me to be able to work with all these guys down here taking this medicine and seeing the profound transformations they experience.
Absolutely. Well, for people listening then, kind of walk us through those 10-ish days for someone. Let's just say, for example, they do have opioid alcoholism kind of woven in as well. What does that look like as far as the first few days? And then what will the actual Ibogaine experience be like for them?
Yeah. So we have 3 different programs. We have the foundational program, which is actually a 5-day program. And that's the program that a lot of veterans and first responders are coming through. We have the detox program, which is for somebody who maybe they can't come off alcohol for a week prior to arrival, or they're using opioids, or they're using a stimulant like cocaine or crystal meth. They'll come through the detox program. And then we also have a neuroregenerative program for things like Parkinson's and multiple sclerosis, where we give a little bit less medicine in those programs, and we're just seeing dramatic results through that as well. But the foundational program, the 5-day program, is kind of what we've become famous for. So how that works is somebody would apply at our website, ambio.life. Our intake team would reach out to them. They might need to come off some other medications. You need to come off most SSRIs or ADHD meds for at least 5 days prior to arrival. So we encourage people to work with their doctors on doing that. Sadly, a lot of doctors are very good at getting people on these substances. They have no idea how to get them off. So we can help them with a taper schedule and a supplementation schedule to do that if need be. We have a coaching program as well. So people will receive coaching prior to arrival, at least a couple sessions before, at least a couple sessions afterwards. People need to submit an EKG and some blood work prior to arrival. Once all that is set, we set the pickup day. We bring people down in groups. Depending on what house the people are going to, we'll do a 6-person group, a 7-person group, or our biggest is an 11-person group. And we'll have them arrive at a hotel near the airport in San Diego. We pick them up around 10 a.m. in the morning, bring them down. It's only about a 30-minute drive from the pickup point to our houses. And then on that first day, we help everybody unpack. We do a circle to get to know each other a bit. We have some lunch. The food's incredible. Again, we're kind of becoming famous for the food. Then everyone goes to a traditional Mexican sweat lodge we've been doing on that first day, which is a great way to kick off the week. It also aligns with the theme of the week, which is being comfortable with being uncomfortable. Everybody comes back. We serve some dinner, some IVs to rehydrate, get some rest. The next morning, there's some blood work in the morning, some medical intake, into breakfast, into breath work. Breath is like this untapped ally that it's very good to get reacquainted with prior to doing something like Ibogaine. So they go into that, followed by another preparation circle, followed by lunch. Then we'll ask that they fast after lunch. In the afternoon, they'll get some one-on-one counseling and a massage. And then at about 7 p.m., we'll give people an IV to help them prepare for Ibogaine. Physiologically anyway, it's got some magnesium in it. And then at about 8 p.m., they'll circle up around a fire for a bit of a gratitude ceremony, and we'll administer the first dose of medicine at that point. We do it in 4 doses across a few hours, but by about 10 o'clock, we'll ask that they're in the treatment room on their mattress. And then basically from that point on, they're putting on a blindfold and going deep into themselves with the Ibogaine. Ibogaine has been referred to as oniric, which means as related to dreams. So it can be for people kind of like a lucid dream type situation. You might see past events and be able to put them in a new light. It might just be sheer chaos, different visions coming at you that make zero sense. And some people don't get any visions at all. And you don't need to have visions for Ibogaine to work for you, is the neat thing. But basically, they're on that mattress for about 12 hours. And then the next day is notoriously known as the gray day. Everybody feels pretty rough the day after Ibogaine. So it's just a lot of recovery. You're about as tired as you've ever been, but you can't fall asleep because the medicine's still in your system. So again, you're just very well taken care of. I'll also mention that we're fully medicalized. Like there's a nurse or a paramedic on duty 24 hours a day while people are here. During the actual Ibogaine, we have at least a physician on duty plus 4 or 5 paramedics. So completely medicalized through the entire process. And then eventually on day 3, they'll eventually get some sleep. It's after you get some sleep that you really start feeling the benefits of Ibogaine. And then the next morning, some yoga in the morning, some light stretching, breakfast, and then we do a debrief circle and a prep circle for the other compound that we work with called 5-MeO-DMT. And then everybody takes 5-MeO-DMT in the afternoon. We're in Mexico, so that 4th night we tend to finish with taco night, which is a big fan favorite. And then everybody's back to San Diego the day after that.
Amazing. Talk to me about integration. One of my friends, Kagan Gill, who was a pilot who had survived the fastest ever ejection, and he
Smurf, right?
Yep. Yeah. Was it you again too?
No, I think he went to a place in Cancun, but he's a good friend of one of the guys that works here. We have an F-18 backseater that's one of our hosts down here. So he introduced me to him over a FaceTime once, I think.
Yeah, amazing. I mean, super powerful story, and really illustrates the failure of the mental health system at that point. But when he came back on, was talking about the wisdom dojo. So basically that integration piece after you've had this, because, as I don't think anyone has ever claimed this is a magic button that you just do this and everything is great again. You've still got issues to deal with in your personal life. Maybe you got issues that still aren't addressed as far as early life, some other poor habits. So talk to me about that integration piece. You've had this incredibly powerful experience. Maybe you saw God in 5-MeO-DMT and you're kind of rethinking about everything that you've ever been taught. What is the next step for these men and women that go through the program?
Yeah, so integration basically means how do you take this profound experience and put it into your daily life? And we have a coaching and integration guide that we put together. And it's basically, in all of the years that I've been doing this, it's like, what's the special sauce? How do we make this work for everybody? What do people need to do so that this really works? And I mentioned earlier that this is a really good negative pattern interrupter. I think an extreme example of that is heroin or fentanyl. So imagine somebody has been using heroin for 10 years prior to arriving at a place like this. We give them Ibogaine. It takes away the addiction virtually overnight. And then what? And then you're left with this vacuum. What do you fill the vacuum with? So Ibogaine is very good at helping you get rid of the negative patterns. It's also very good at giving you an opportunity to implement new positive patterns. So we recommend, and our coaches recommend, looking at what those are going to be. What are you going to do on a daily basis to help make your life better? Are you going to pray more? Are you going to meditate more? Are you going to exercise more? Are you going to surround yourself with community like the community in the Wisdom Dojo, which is a meditation community of a whole bunch of former veterans? It's really where the rubber meets the road. And to a large part, that is up to the individual. What are you going to do to take the most advantage of this? And what are those actions going to be? we recommend something we call the 5 to Thrive, which is take some time, and we have a recommended 5 things as well, but take some time to think about what are 5 things you could do every single day to make sure you're keeping your life on track, moving in the right direction. Is it learn something every day? Is it an enrichment activity like learning the guitar, the language you always wanted to speak? Is it exercise? Is it meditation? What is it? But it's basically, it looks different for everybody, and it's vitally important. And it's kind of, like I say, where the rubber meets the road. What are you going to do to make your life better? And what are you going to commit yourself to make sure that you take complete advantage of this opportunity?
There also seems to be an element of, these experiences, especially with 5-AMEO, like really opening the door to the closet in the mind that maybe you didn't realize was there. And for example, a kind of talk therapy counseling that didn't work prior to this, now you're able to access this and work through some of that with the therapist that you're working with as well.
Big time. Or like the 12 steps, some people feel as though they're allergic to a 12-step program like AA. But after something like Ibogaine, those meetings are kind of awesome. And I think one of the big things, and you alluded to that with the opening the door in the mind, but step 1 of AA has a component of admitting there's a higher power and asking it for help. And I have treated more people than I can count who said, I was an atheist before I walked in here. Now I know there's a God. So all of a sudden that makes the 12 steps work again. Or all of a sudden you have a certain tenderness about you that allows you to lie on your psychologist's couch and actually get to the nitty gritty of the stuff that you were skirting before.
This just popped in my head. I'm curious to your answer on this. Recently, I've really been kind of disgruntled about the obvious disassociation or disconnection between knowing a God and a hijacking of, I'll say the one that I was brought up in, Christianity. Have you had people that thought they were, in this case, Christian, go through this and then recalibrate what that true faith is supposed to be about, what the community and the compassion and the empathy that's at the root of that religion, kind of click back in and reconnect with it?
100%. I'll even, perhaps a more extreme example is a gentleman I treated. Again, he's been public with his story. His name is Fawad Khalsi. He was the imam at his mosque. He's a Muslim man, and he got addicted to oxys he had never had a drink in his life, never smoked in his life, went into his doctor with severe pancreatitis, gave him OxyContin, had no idea he was addicted to these things until Christmas hit one year, and he went into extreme withdrawals, which led him to massive depression. His doctor got audited, investigated, almost lost his license for his case in particular for over prescribing these, which led him to being cut off of the supply. He's going to his next door neighbor for a street supply of oxys. Miserable, used to run a travel agency as well, couldn't travel. His buddy said, you got to come with me. We got to get you out of here. Let's go to Japan. It's on me. YouTube is auto-playing videos about Japan. One of the videos says 10 things you should never bring to Japan. Number 1 is any kind of opiate. They're completely illegal there. So more depression. His wife says, let's go for a trip anyway. They went to San Francisco. He's miserable, sitting in his hotel room, watching a marathon of Law and Order. It's 2 a.m. and the one Law and Order episode that mentions Ibogaine pops up. And he's like, what? Is this real? And he starts looking into it. He books a trip to Mexico. Whoever it was in Mexico said, you've got a really good Ibogaine provider in Vancouver. He lived in Vancouver. So he came to me when I ran Liberty Route. And he had a vision of himself running towards God, and he was carrying a briefcase, which was his gift to God. And right before he got to God, the briefcase broke open and it was empty. And he realized that this was speaking to him about the way he had been approaching his religion, which was methodical, which was dry, which was ultimately empty. And Ibogaine turned him into the most beautiful spiritual man imaginable. He has brought focus on addiction within the Muslim community in Vancouver. He has done so much good post-journey with that shift from, being religious to being spiritual. And it's sad. I consider myself Christian. I was raised in the United Church of Canada. I stepped away from religion for years and kind of became atheistic, and then kind of became more spiritual, and then turned back into Christianity and kind of feel as though I'm more aligned with the essence of what Jesus was teaching, which has largely also inspired my path in life. But I'm currently writing a book about it. The title is Heroic Christianity. And through the process of this book, the word religion means to tie together, relegare. So it's like tying together, and it's tying yourself to wholeness. So religion itself should ultimately mean, binding yourself to the whole, which ironically, especially in the eyes of a lot of Christians, the way they might look at this word, that's exactly what the word yoga means. Yoga means to yoke to like the yoke a beast of burden would use to yoke themselves to a cart. You're tying yourself to the wholeness of the universe. The word yoga and the word religion both mean exactly the same thing. I had no idea what religion meant until I stumbled upon that the other day.
I think this is a really powerful kind of perspective, because when I look at what is being done in the name of Christianity at the moment, as I sit here in America, hunting down immigrants, telling, addicts that Narcan is wasted on them, shooing homeless away from your area, those are not things that Jesus would do.
No.
At all. So I wonder how much moral injury there is amongst these people that claim from their church, but they know in their subconscious that they're actually not even aligning to their own values.
Yeah, I wonder. I see it, and there's kind of this revitalization of Christianity, I think, among young men. A lot of it, I think ultimately it's going to lead down a very beautiful path. But as soon as you use your newfound faith to make somebody else worse than you, like you're missing the lesson. You're missing the guy's entire message. Love your enemies as yourself. Love your neighbors as yourself. And that to me is a profound. In 2003, I believe, I tried 5-MeO-DMT for the first time, and I had kind of been new on the spiritual path at that time. And I took 5-MeO-DMT, and all of a sudden I could feel every cell of my body being aware of me being aware of it. And then that knowing exploded into the whole universe. All of a sudden I could feel every atom in the universe, and I was one with it all. And I felt this interchange of awareness behind it all. And, that was kind of the ego getting blasted away. But as the ego came back, it's like, what does that mean? And it came in that it's perfect. You can't mess it up. The whole universe is a bed of perfection upon which all of your ideas of imperfection might spring from, but the perfection comes first. And it was just this profound sense of oneness and unity that, I knew on a visceral level for the first time, or the first time I can remember. And it was that knowing of unity, once you tease that out enough, like we are literally one with each other. So if anyone is suffering, then all of us is suffering. So that's what can I do to help suffering? Well, this neighborhood called the Downtown East Side looks like it could use some help. And I always use that. I should also say that we were able to treat some people pro bono from the Downtown East Side. That's not an easy process. You don't want to just pluck somebody up from that neighborhood, give them Ibogaine and drop them back. So I went on a long process within the Vancouver area network of drug users, vetting a bunch of people. And in the end, it was one guy who showed up every week for this meeting. We gave him Ibogaine. Long story short, it went great for him. It really changed his life. But I always use that as inspiration. Like if we can help a neighborhood that seems to be this far gone, then there's really hope for everybody. And I'm still just working on that mission. That's really all I'm doing. Is there's a lot more work than I knew needed to be done to be able to provide this medicine at scale. So that's all we're doing is as Ambio, our mission is to provide this medicine at scale to people. So hopefully before I die, I can provide this medicine to scale at people from that Downtown East Side still as well.
I think there's been no greater red flag than the apathy towards what's happening in Gaza. When it's tens of thousands of children, you cannot look in the mirror and say, oh, they're Hamas. Is there a generational issue between these two sides? Of course. Does it go? I mean, if you go far enough back, the British are partly to blame to this whole, you know what I mean? But the only thing that we can do, any of us listening, is to look in the mirror and go, well, how can I fix me first? Then how can I benefit my wife, my husband, my children, and then step outside your front door and be like, how can I be a positive influence in my community? And if we all did that and we actually made healing front and center, I don't think you would see the tyranny, gain the power that it does. But if you have a bunch of people that are unwilling to even do their own work, then it's easy to turn your head when something really, really awful happens. That, going back to your grandfather, my grandfather, that fought the very thing that's happening now, that took up arms and went to another country to protect innocent people from these kind of things. So I think that this awakening of healing, this awakening of reconnecting with faith, not a doctrine, is what needs to happen, because there are so many, glaring signs now of if we don't start having this awakening, then really bad things are going to happen. But we can absolutely turn a corner. And it's not just our firefighters and our Navy SEALs, it's every single person can go on their version of a healing journey. And does everyone need Ibogaine? No. Does everyone need, psilocybin or, SSRIs? No. There's a lot of us that I think just doing some of the, eating better and exercising, getting out in nature and meditating, we can take a large chunk of those people hurting out of the equation. And then we can really focus these amazing modalities that we have available to the people that actually need it. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's one of I mentioned the 5 to Thrive in our coaching and integration guide. One of the 5 that I invite people to consider is to develop a passion project. All right, you've made yourself feel a lot better. I know one of the things most people need to continue to feel that way is a sense of purpose. So what's something that you could just start doing to try and make this world a better place? Because if all of us take upon just a small project, it starts small at the beginning, to make the world a better place, what's it going to be? I recognize that. I think I'll give credit to this first 5-MeO DMT experiences, realizing we're all one, knowing I want to give back, having no idea how I'm going to give back. Before the idea of helping the Downtown East Side came on the radar, I just went out and started picking up garbage. I just took a garbage bag, I picked up trash, I filled up bags and bags and bags, and I found that once I got myself in that flow of giving, I don't even call it selflessly. I think there's a trick that I think the thing that makes a human feel better than anything else is truly helping a person. So I feel as though the most selfish thing you can do, again, ironically, becomes altruism, becomes giving back, becomes helping other people. And I found that once I was giving back like that, somewhat selfishly, because it felt good to even just pick up that garbage, I was in the flow. Then the next idea came. Then I got inspired. That turned into me sitting on this podcast with you, you know? I had no idea how I was going to help as a 23-year-old kid. Felt helpless, but was praying desperately, please make use of me. And I don't know how you're going to make use of me in the long run, but my neighborhood could use a bit of a cleanup, you know? So I just think that's what this book, Heroic Christianity, is all about. Like, how do you take your faith and turn it into action? Because what the world needs right now is people actually living from the values that Jesus taught and turning that into healing what's going on in this mad world right now.
Absolutely. I mean, I don't know if I'm being naive, but I feel like the common takeaway from most of the holy books that are out there is just simply don't be a dick.
It's true. Yeah.
So whether you're a Muslim or a Jew or, Jewish, excuse me, or, Christian or Buddhist or Hindu or Sikh, all these other ones, ultimately, I would argue that the wisdom that survived these ages is simply that. If they were preaching, hey, the best way to carry on is to continue genocide and create war, I don't think those books would last very long. No. But if love and community, compassion and empathy is at the root of it, that's what we got to refine. That's what we got to lean back into.
Amen.
All right, for people listening, so we have Veterans Exploring Treatment Solution, Marcus and Amber's nonprofit, if people are in the military. We have
vetsolutions.org is their website.
Thank you. And then we have the 343 Fund, Angela Scudin, for first responders. So talk to me about that one.
Yeah, so that's 343fund.org. Angela Scudin is another force of nature. Her husband was a firefighter, Casey Scudin, and they were driving down a road to celebrate something, one of their birthdays, and a tree fell on the car and just out of nowhere killed her husband. And massive healing process from that. There was a massive healing process for Angela that started even well before that, as she was trying to cure herself from Lyme disease. Find some Angela Scudin podcasts and hear her story. It's really remarkable. But she was inspired by Marcus and Amber and decided to set up a nonprofit that would help first responders in the same way. And she has succeeded, and it's incredible. So she works with whether it's police, fire, paramedic, first responders. She'll help them get the treatment down here at Ambio. Plus, she set up, as Vets has, just this very robust community around it, with weekly breathwork sessions, with weekly ways to tune in, ongoing integration. I think she's extended the integration coaching so that people can show up for a year for integration. So yeah, Angela is hardcore. They have a couple of fundraisers coming up in October in Chicago and Austin. So if people are interested, they should come and check those out.
I can't remember the episode number, but Angela was on 2 months ago. For people listening, just Google Behind the Shield Angela Scudin and you'll find her episode there. Are there any other nonprofits you want to talk about before we go to some closing questions?
Oh man. Nothing. There is, I'd say nothing that really has a lot of legs under them. No, those are the main ones. Those are the main. Heroic Hearts is another one. They've sent us a few. Heroic Hearts is another. Yeah, they're awesome, Jesse. They've just started sending us a few, so kudos to them. And where was the other one? I'll kick myself afterwards for not saying. Oh, another one called Songs for Soldiers. They've been great as well. You should check out them on YouTube, Songs for Soldiers. They have a really beautiful testimonial of a guy that came through that really inspired them to throw money this way as well. It's been pretty amazing.
Fantastic. All right. Well, I want to go to some closing questions quickly. Before we even get to that, actually, what is going to be the name of your book? I think you said it once before. And then when are you looking to release it?
So I have a 20 chapter book already written. And as I continued down this process, I realized it's not as perfect as I want it to be. So I have actually hired a writing coach, and he's a great guy, also named Jonathan, and he helped my business partner Jonathan get his book written. And I'll plug his book as well, because Jonathan Dickinson has written what is going to be the definitive book on Ibogaine. It's been picked up for publishing. It should be available for pre-order soon, and then will be available in the second half of next year. I think the title is still up in the air, but really looking forward to that. I've read the first half of it. It's hard to read something on PDF. I gotta finish it, but it's an incredible book. And then I've just come up with the subtitle of my book, so I'm actually reading it off my screen. Heroic Christianity, walking the sacred path with bold faith to transcend shadows, awaken divine glory, and bring heaven to earth. So
Love it.
No small goals there.
And when do you think that will be out?
I should be done my process by, it was 5 months, so January or so. And then I think I'm just going to self-publish it.
That's what I did with mine. Super easy, and no one can tell you got to take that bit out. You just publish it as it is. All right. Well, the next question then, are there, aside from those two, are there any books that you love to recommend? It can be related to our discussion today or completely unrelated.
Yeah, 100%. I really love Autobiography of a Yogi by Paramahansa Yogananda. This book came into my life. It was, I can't remember how it came into my life, but it was the first and only book I read in its entirety on my iPhone. And then I found out shortly thereafter that it is the only book Steve Jobs had on his iPad, and it's the book Steve Jobs had handed out to everyone who attended his funeral. And it is basically the autobiography of a young Indian man who became a great leader. And what that book did for me is it really spread my mind as to what's possible with spirituality, just beyond kind of the typical Christian tropes. I feel as though ultimately Yogananda and Jesus were drinking from the same cup. I think their teachings are in complete alignment, but I love that book. I find a book that really, like I've read every self-help book you could get your hands on, Tony Robbins type stuff, all of it, Think and Grow Rich, The Science of Getting Rich. Those are both incredible if you haven't read those. The Science of Getting Rich, actually, I threw the baby out with the bathwater on religion, and it was The Science of Getting Rich, which said there is a thinking substance that permeates the interspaces of the universe, and a thought impressed upon this substance brings about the thing thought about. And the way that hit me one day, I'm like, is that God? Is that what they're trying to sell me, with God everywhere, all powerful, all knowing? So that opened me up to also, I started looking at every spiritual thing I could get my hand on and started looking for what was similar between them all. And of course, there's tremendous similarity between all of them if you have eyes to see. But all of these books essentially say you need to stop thinking poorly and start thinking positively, which is easier said than done. You know, we just spin all these negative thoughts all the time and negative emotions. And a book that changed the game for me on that is called The Astonishing Power of Emotions by Esther Hicks. And I was back home in Kitchener. I was at a used bookstore, and there were two books that I was thinking of getting. I got one. I set the other one down. As I'm flying home the next day, I'm like, oh, I should have got that Astonishing Power of Emotions book. I'm still going to go to a bookstore and pick it up. So I get home. I lived right next door to a bookstore in White Rock. I go to the bookstore. The book isn't there. I treat somebody that weekend with a therapeutic dose of psychedelics. The one book he brought with him was The Astonishing Power of Emotions. So it fell into my lap, and it really talks about, it frames your emotions in a very useful way and kind of lets you know what they are as far as kind of your internal guidance system and how to use them properly. And I read the first half of that book while I was giving this gentleman his therapeutic psychedelic session, and something clicked in me. Like all of a sudden, it was very easy for me to stay positive all the time. I think I went about 6 months without having a negative emotion. I could, if it started creeping in, I could instantly reframe it, flip it, and just stay oriented in a way that I feel as though if you're positive, if you're at peace, then you're going to attract more of that into your life. So highly recommend that book. I could go on books, man. So
no, there's some great ones, some I haven't heard of before. So thank you.
Cool.
What about films and documentaries?
I highly recommend one called Finding Joe. It is a documentary. You can find it on YouTube. And it is all about the life and teachings of Joseph Campbell. Joseph Campbell was the guy who coined the term the hero's journey. He studied mythology as a passion and for a living, and he realized that there is a common template in every story we've ever heard, which is basically the departure, or there's the ordinary world. Luke Skywalker's on Tatooine, Anderson's working at his office before he becomes Neo. Then there's the call to adventure. Then there's the initiation. Then there's the lessons learned on the road of trials. There's all the temptations that face themselves. There's all the dragons you need to battle. Then, you throw the ring away like Frodo did, and you go home and you've learned something and you make your community better for having done that. So that's the hero's journey. And the movie Finding Joe documentary really outlines that. And then that's why this book is called Heroic Christianity, is it really, Joseph Campbell himself said that the hero's journey is a journey back to wholeness. So heroic Christianity is, my humble way of trying to get us back to wholeness, which is described as Eden. We start out in Eden, Adam and Eve get kicked out of there, and then nowhere in the history of mankind have we returned. So we're kind of in the middle of a hero's journey that is incomplete. And it is my humble wish that this book might help us in a little way to help us complete that journey. Other documentaries, I'm featured in a really cool documentary called Dosed. You can find it at dosedmovie.com. And there's two parts. There's a part one, and then there's a Dosed part two. I am in Dosed part one, which is all about one young woman's journey to use Ibogaine to come off of heroin and she was a polysubstance drug user. It's an incredible movie, and spoiler alert, that woman is still doing really great, Adrienne. And then I'm in as I mentioned earlier, there's a documentary coming up. It'll be on Netflix November 3rd. It's called In Waves and War, and it really tracks Marcus Capone and two other Navy SEALs, DJ Shipley and Matty Roberts, on their different timelines with Ibogaine. So Matty actually goes through a journey at Ambio within the movie. DJ actually joins him on that. And, we hear about what happened to Marcus and DJ both in the past, their first times doing it as well.
Fantastic. Well, speaking of great people, Is there a person that you'd recommend to come on this podcast as a guest to speak to the first responders, military, and associated professions of the world?
Have you had Gabor on?
I haven't. I have tried. So if you have the ability to help me with that.
I know I can definitely put in a word for you with Gabor. Yeah, I would say Gabor Mate, and my business partner, Jonathan Dickinson, when the time is right, when his book is maybe a little closer to coming out. He's got a lot of wisdom to share, and he is a psychedelic researcher. He knows, he's been to Gabon. He has relationships with the country. He has been issued the first and only export license to legally export Iboga out of Gabon. He's been initiated multiple times into the medicine. So you definitely want to speak to him as well.
Let's make that
My
happen.
other business partner, Jose Nzunza, he's a rock star as well. So there's four for you.
And you said Jose was a paramedic. Have I got that right?
Yeah, he's a paramedic. So paramedic and former firefighter as well. So he'd be perfect.
Absolutely. All right. Well, let's make those happen if you're able to. That would be phenomenal.
100%.
All right. Well, then the last question, which is going to be an interesting one for you, before we go to where people can find you and Ambio, what do you do to decompress?
I grew up in a house with a sauna, and I, tongue in cheek, will tell my friends and family I'm going to church, and they know that means I'm going into the sauna. In Tijuana, I don't plan on being here forever, so I didn't want to drop $6 or $7 grand on a sauna that I wouldn't be able to take with me. But then the algorithm provided on Instagram, and I got one of those sauna boxes, which is a little steam sauna. So I use it all the time. And then, kind of same thing with the cold plunge. I didn't want to break the bank. So I said the first time a cold plunge comes up here that's less than $1,500, I'm going to grab it. So I've got the sauna and cold plunge here, and those are incredible. Plus, I don't own a TV. I have, I'll watch the odd thing on my phone, especially when I'm on an airplane. I have a kind of a projector thing I can pull out and watch every now and then as well. And I just read a lot of books. I read a lot of I read a lot of fiction now. I listen to nonfiction, and I read a lot of fiction, and I've really gotten into fantasy lately. Like, for me, the joy of reading fiction is just how far can the human imagination go? And just to see some of these worlds and scenarios people come up with really inspires me, and it's a good way to end the day, the last half an hour reading a chapter, for sure.
Beautiful. All right. Well, then for people listening, where can they find Ambio? Where can they find you? And then if you want to talk to us about Malta.
For sure. So ambio.life is the website. Like I say, currently you just need to get to San Diego. It's very easy to get here. And we work with all these hard chargers, whether they're fire, whether they're special forces, but we work with plenty of regular people too. Anybody that's really looking for an advantage in life, to help them heal. We're very good at getting people from -10 to 0. We're also very good at getting people from 0 to +10. There's an optimization thing that happens with this protocol as well. Traumatic brain injury, if you hit your head, if things aren't working for you, if it's just drinking, whatever it is, it's don't be afraid to reach out. We do have a location that's opening up in Europe, and that'll be in Malta, the island of Malta. And that should be open come January. So if you wanted to be one of the first people to go through there, you can reach out to us around that. And we are on Instagram at Ambio Life Sciences is the company. At psychedelic_provider is myself. And LinkedIn, Facebook, all that stuff as well. I haven't quite stepped into the TikTok world yet, I don't think.
Well, Trevor, I want to thank you so much. I mean, firstly, for what you've done, because there's no question that it was the SEAL community that really opened the door for the rest of us in uniform but also for, coming on the Behind the Shield podcast, being so generous with your time, being vulnerable about some of your experiences too. I know this is going to save a lot of lives. This is very early in the first responder conversation, but with Angela and some of the voices I've had on that have been kind of forging the path with that, I think the potential healing for our first responders, military, and as you mentioned, everyone else is so incredibly exciting. So I want to thank you so, so much for coming on the show today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. It's been a lot of fun. Thanks for taking the time to have a really good conversation. Thanks, James.